This is a tough business. You know, if you love something, it'll break your heart. But it's the funnest thing in the world, and there is not a feeling like seeing something that manifested itself out of an idea and becomes a tangible product.
Intensity, man! Intensity!
All right, I need everybody in places!
Action!
That's what I'm on right there.
My only hope is for you to come back for me.
The way The Last Bullet came about is it started with a conversation that I had with a director buddy of mine, Savvy Lorestani. I was doing a job for another company, time-lapse video on top of a roof in Atlanta, and we were just kind of sitting around talking, and we're coming up with different ideas. And one of the ideas that we kept coming back to was, wouldn't it be interesting to just rip the blindfold off the audience and thrust them into this really intense situation at the very beginning of a film, and then let the story develop from there.
Echo, at your discretion. Out.
A couple of days passed, and I picked up the phone and I called Mike and I said, you know, what do you think about doing a film like this? And he and I started to kind of brainstorm the idea a little bit, and we said, well, one of the things that we could probably do with the resources that we have and through the people that we know is maybe a war picture and have it all take place in a foxhole. And Mike, being the prolific writer that he is, had a draft within a few days after that conversation.
I was glad that we chose a story about war because I knew it would stretch me as a writer. It would make me get out of the familiarity of the places that I had been writing about. Even though the story takes place in a foxhole in Vietnam, it's essentially the struggle of people that are thrust in situations that they are not sure how they're going to react until they are there. In my mind, I try to kind of outline the story. I understand the conflict, and it wasn't very difficult in this situation to figure out what the conflict was. You know, one of them's trying to save his buddy's life, and the decision is, you know, do I stay? What's the best way to help my friend? Stay here or go and get help?
You need to go.
Our creative process is we have a writing team. Michael Buchanan and Diane Lang and myself work on an idea, and then Mike and Diane go off and actually pen a script from start to finish, and then they'll send it back to me, and I'll look at it and see if it works visually and see if it works narratively.
This is 4-6. You guys better hurry. Bring the Marines and God.
When I was talking to Jason about it, he said that it would be best for everyone if we were in one location. And so then the focus of the story became set in a foxhole, initially just outside of it, but within 30 seconds something takes place and they're pulled into the foxhole, and that's the setting for the rest of the story.
Just from talking about the ideas and looking at the first draft, we had a fairly simple picture that takes place in one location, and it's a period piece because it started off as a World War II picture. And as we started looking at it, we were like, okay, well, it's a war picture, we need to have guns, and you know, for production value, we should probably have some bombs and some things like that.
We realized that that would be very expensive, or much more so than a Vietnam era, just in securing equipment and accuracy. And so that was the first thing we did, was change it to a Vietnam era.
Battery. That's it. That's it. Blah, blah.
I'm okay.
That's it. That's it, fellas. Bang, bang, bang!
Once we started talking about the story and I started producing pages and went back and forth with Jason and the team, and then we had a script that everybody was comfortable with and wanted to be involved with, then it became our task to secure the funds.
Don't expect that the first people that you talk to are going to say, yes, oh, all right, let's go make your film. People are going to slam the door in your face. They're going to tell you it can't be done. They're going to tell you that, you know, it's not going to do it. What you have to do is you have to have undying belief.
We were bound to try to make a picture with a low budget and solicit as much in-kind services as we possibly could.
And investing is not always money. It could be allowing you to use their restaurant for free to shoot your project. It could be an in-kind service from a production partner. It can be many things. It's not always about money. You need to have your ducks in a row. You don't just need to say, oh, I wrote a great script, let's go do it. You need to figure out how you're going to do it. And you need to create an environment that breeds confidence to the people that you're going to work with. You need to be able to walk not only in the creative world, but you also need to understand the language of the business world.
Good.
And one of the best ways to do that is to get books on the business of filmmaking if this is something that you want to do as a career. Because if you can speak their language, then you can educate them on the filmmaking process, and then together you guys can walk down that road. When you're starting off and you want to direct, 9 times out of 10 you have to produce. You just end up falling into that role. Those responsibilities include pretty much everything under the sun, and especially for a project that is of this scale that has its complications, it really all started with insurance. And how do we get the kind of insurance that we need to do what we want to do? When you're talking about using ammunition and you're talking about using pyrotechnics and things like that, you have to have a lot of coverage. You have to have certified state licensed pyrotechnicians. There's just a lot of technical things that had to be addressed before we could really get into the meat and potatoes of the project itself.
We're dealing with people that are in the woods and getting them down to the set, things like that. So there's a lot of places for mishaps. If you're shooting on location, whether it's in a studio with heavy equipment around and lights that are very hot and things like that, or if you're shooting in the backwoods of Georgia with all the possible problems in that.
When we're talking about production insurance, it's not like going to State Farm or Prudential or anything like that. We're talking about very specific insurance that is usually underwritten by a very specific company.
Places are not going to rent you these massive generators. They're not going to rent you cameras or whatever it is you need equipment-wise if you do not have insurance.
And it might be that you don't need any insurance, but you'll know when you do, because you'll go to rent a piece of equipment and they'll say, do you have insurance? And usually it's a blanket coverage of $1 million. Don't freak out, just ask them who they get their insurance from, or the production services companies usually have a list of insurance service providers. So you just ask them for that list, make a few phone calls, and find out if what you're doing needs an annual policy or if you need a short-term policy. The annual policy will cover you for cameras and grip trucks and all the dollies and cranes and things that you would need to run a production outside of stunts and pyros and helicopters and those things. If you're not using an annual policy, you can get what's called a short-term policy. A short-term policy is the same as an annual policy, and it will cover you, but it will only cover you for the production days that you select. So your payment is prorated for between 2 to 5 days or 10 days or 20 days or however many days you have. Usually if you go over a certain amount of days, it's cheaper to just go ahead and buy the annual policy anyways.
It made more sense to buy a huge insurance package over, that lasted over the course of maybe a year or more, which ended up being way more expensive, but they'll have the insurance for longer, and we'll be able to use it for other projects.
Roll sound! Roll camera! All right, here we go, and action!
Abort mission. That'll help.
And cut! All right, moving on. Yeah.
It's great to just grab your friends and say, hey, let's make a film and you play this part and I'll play this part. It's especially good if your friends have any kind of inclination or want to act. What we did is we held a couple of open casting calls. Again, when you're working on a limited budget, it's tough to get good actors, and you really have to pick and choose your actors. It's really difficult to do a casting call because you get a certain amount of time with the actor and you have to make a decision. And you're making a decision that's really going to affect the outcome of your film. It's really kind of hit or miss. This is going to start with a wide. You're starting to fade. Here's shock. You go to your heart. That's what your picture is. You pull it out. I don't want you to say miss you. Say it with your eyes. And I guess the biggest thing that you can do in a casting call is figure out if the actors that you're talking to can take direction.
Because that one went before we got to it, and I was like...
When Angie Dean and Mike and I were going through the casting process, Matt was cast months before we ever found who was going to be Matt's partner. And when I say months, I mean like probably 2 or 3 months before we found Jay Todd. We only cast Jay Todd a couple weeks before we started shooting. It took us that long to find the right people.
All right, that's enough of that.
Once you get the casting done and you get the actors in place and you get the funding in place and you get your insurance and you're ready to go, then you talk about your locations.
Another thing that was invaluable was our involvement with Riverwood Studios. To be able to have a secure location that was behind gates, that was out in the woods. We had access to bamboo so that we could recreate the world of Vietnam.
John Avnet did a film back in the 90s called The War with Kevin Costner, and one of the scenes in that movie takes place in Vietnam. Well, they shot this film on the back lot of this studio. Well, anyways, to make a long story short, they had planted all this bamboo, and so 20 years later, it's just fields and fields and fields of bamboo. And so Mike and I went to the back lot, and we were looking at these different possibilities and thinking about shots and thinking about what kind of physical things that we would need to bring the script to the screen. And we saw the bamboo, and so we were like, okay, we like this location. And once we picked the location, we spray painted out where we wanted the hole to go. And so we knew that we were going to chop bamboo and put it all in these different places. Well, Scott, the owner of the studio, was kind enough to lend us a backhoe, have one of his staff actually dig us a hole. Well, when I was talking to our military advisor, I said, so, you know, in a situation where you've got a foxhole or you've got a fire base or you've got this, where would the dirt be? And he said, well, generally the dirt would be in front of the hole. I get a phone call from the studio saying, hey, where do you want the dirt? And I said, well, you know, according to our military advisor, it should be in front of the hole. Well, I was going out there later that day with our producer, and when we showed up on set, there was our hole that we were going to shoot in, and right in front of where all the action is going to take place was about a 10-foot mound of dirt. I mean, this thing looked like a Volkswagen. And so, since we're working with limited resources and you can only ask for so many favors, it became my job then to figure out how we're going to get the dirt out of the way of the camera. We called in our volunteers and we grabbed shovels and we moved about 2 tons of dirt by shovel in a matter of 2 or 3 days. And it was just really tough.
We had to take every piece of power or every ounce of power that we needed down to the woods. And so by the time they calculated all the lights and all the cameras and everything else and craft services and all that and running computers, it was an immense amount of power. Luckily in Atlanta, there's PC&E, a place that does production services for movies, and they had a wide variety of generators. You know, once they knew how much the power they needed, then you know, that kind of defines what you have to do from that point forward. You have to err on the side of too much. Because if it was not enough, then you're going to have to decide which piece of equipment is left to the side, and that's not a good problem to have. Shooting at night was a consideration because then you couldn't see into the distance and realize that, hey, there were dogwoods in Georgia, you know, live oaks in the background and things like that. That probably don't occur too much in Vietnam. And so we had a lot more control of the set. Visually and background-wise.
When I went to meet with the studio to talk about the location and to talk about the things that we wanted to do, it was brought to my attention that, you know, you're probably going to have a better selling point, production value-wise, of being able to make this believable if you shoot during the night. And that comes with its own series of problems.
A lot of filmmaking gear is black. Of course, the reason why it's black is so it won't reflect light. And naturally, at night, if it's a black piece of gear, it's kind of hard to find, so everybody has to have a flashlight.
When Matt froze his grenade, and we shot that several times, there's a spring mechanism when you pull the pin and let the spoon fly, then I needed to find the spoon again in the darkness.
One night, shooting all night is okay, but 2 or 3 or 4 in a row, and it starts to really weigh on people.
I'm dying, man.
All this stuff.
I'm dying.
I would say about 4 a.m. I started, on the second night, started kind of running out of gas, and it looked like everybody else was starting to get a little crabby.
So you've got people that are tired, which means that they're less likely to perform well. Safety becomes a really big concern because now people aren't setting up the lights properly, and they're kind of doing everything a little bit halfway. So you got to keep on people. I mean, you don't want to be like, screaming and hollering at them, but you just got to make sure to have someone there who's sort of designated to check to make sure all those things are going right.
There's a lot of equipment out. There's a lot of cords out. So tread lightly, please. I don't want anybody to trip. There's enough hazards out here as it is. So just mind your step. Grab a flashlight if you need it.
Remember how critical. And we'll start.
Shooting on day 1 of Last Bullet was a challenge. When we arrived on set, the advance team had arrived a few hours before us to find the foxhole that we were supposed to shoot in filled up with 2 feet of water.
There was a torrential downpour one day before the shoot.
So on Thursday afternoon, we're looking at the hole and it's full of water, and we're supposed to shoot in less than 24 hours. How do we get the water out of the hole?
We were having power issues because we didn't have the generator there, and so tried to suck the water out and couldn't get power at first. And so Jason jumped in the hole and just starts taking a bucket and dumping the water out. And I said, Jason, that's not going to work. You're going to be here all night.
Then we tried a shop vac. Then we tried, all these other things. Luckily, the studio was kind enough to rent us a sump pump, and we were able to suck most of that water out.
I don't know if he wanted to see us squirm for a bit to see how we handled it, but finally he said, I have a generator you guys can borrow, and we said, oh, okay, thanks. So
going into Friday, the question became, how are we going to shoot this movie in this mud hole that we want to shoot with these really expensive cameras inside this hole?
In Georgia, when there's mud, it's not just dark, brown, dirty mud. It's actually super slippery.
Oh, when you're done, I need to talk to you.
Move, X-Lax. Did you see what almost happened? Oh, yeah.
What we came up with was, if we get plywood and we get plastic and we cut down some trees and bamboo and we lay it across the mud, then we lay the plastic down and we lay the plywood down on top of that, we can build some sort of platform for the camera people, and luckily that worked.
The reality is that's numb as I knew it. The mud was so bad over there that oftentimes back on a fire base we wore sandbags pulled up over our boots trying to keep this 10 pounds of mud off each foot.
Being on the wood and slipping and sliding, it actually ended up looking really great in the footage, but being a camera operator, when you're having to look inside a camera and you can't really see what you're doing, it can be a little scary.
If you get a chance, tell Sarah and the kids I love them.
Full rehearsal. Quiet on the set, please.
As a producer, it's your job to surround yourself with the best possible people, creating the team from day one.
What are your goals for your project, for your movie? If you just want to show it to your buddies, then that defines the process. If you want to put it on YouTube, then so does that. We knew that we wanted this to be a part of our company, something we could be proud of, that we could enter in film festivals and use it as a jumping off point for the next project.
On your project, you might only need a cameraman, an audio person, an editor, and a director, and that may all be you, and then the rest are your friends. But on a bigger production, there's a couple of roles that are filled. We needed a director of photography, we needed a great audio person, we needed a special effects advisor, we need a stunt coordinator, we needed a military advisor.
Now that can't stick you, supposedly, because it's metal over metal wrapped.
Supposedly, like
Supposedly,
It turns out that we were going to shoot 2 cameras, so we needed an additional cameraman. We needed craft service, we needed to feed the crew, so we had to have catering. All these things are important when you're trying to make a project because you can't do all this by yourself. And it's really important that when you're making a film that you're able to focus on your job, and if you surround yourself with great people and you create a great team, then you can focus on your job and they can focus on their job, and the team comes together as success. The director of photography is not somebody that just picks up the camera and shoots. The director of photography is somebody that works with the director to help create a look for a film.
The way the camera flows through the scene, the angles that you try to pick, you know, movement of the camera, those things are what I'm responsible for. And also the lighting, which is really the most important part of the director of photography's job, is to supervise the lighting on a bigger project. But on a smaller project like this, I actually have to hands-on doing it myself.
Jay. Believe it or not, man, I think we might have overdone it.
Oh no. I tend to do that.
It looks beautiful though, man. I mean you did a wonderful job, but around the edges, could you just cut it back a little bit? Maybe just pull a few leaves off?
Let me see what you're talking about.
I mean, see, I'm looking at it. And it looks great, but I just want like not in the dead center of it, but around the periphery. I wouldn't mind a few random beams escaping out. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, I'll see that.
So like almost if you had smoke going, you'd see the beams. Because eventually we're gonna have smoke. But
Alrighty.
We spent an awful lot of time and energy in planning and talking about how we were going to take a movie that is essentially 2 guys in a hole and make it interesting. And I think that that's a big challenge, is how do we make it interesting visually? How do we keep the pacing of it quick? How do we give it some kinetic energy? And so the director of photography and I started talking about lighting schemes, not only lighting for the camera, but for lighting to create a mood. How do you say it?
We look at some other movies to try to get an idea of the style that we're going for. So for Last Bullet, we looked at Platoon and other Vietnam films.
medic! Medic!
And by watching these other movies, we sort of got an idea of this non-motivated jungle light. Light is typically motivated, meaning you know where it's coming from and why it's coming from there, like whether it's the sun or the moon or the lamp that's on the table. But sometimes in some situations you have something called unmotivated light, and usually that's something that's annoying and the audience doesn't accept it and doesn't like it. But in certain situations, like caves and jungles and dark houses and things, they accept it. So we had jungle lights. We just basically set up lights way back in the woods and pointed them at the camera.
Is that fast enough? That looks great, but it goes up fast and then comes down slower. Yeah.
We did the flares and the distant explosions with tungsten light, which actually looks reddish on film compared to the bluish look of sunlight and HMI lights. We set up 2 lights that were going to be the distant explosions, and we put something called a dimmer on those. And what a dimmer is a little box with a little dial on it, and you have an operator who can operate the dial to go full power all the way back down to off, and can randomize it to any way in between it. And how fast he turns it is how fast it lights up. And if he turns it slow, it'll of course the light will dim slowly. So we looked at some explosions on other films and saw that what it typically does is the light shows up really quick in the explosion and then slowly dwindles down at about 3 or 4 times the time that it took to blow up. So we just practiced that, and so we would just jam it up real quick and then about 4 times slow down. Then we did a flare idea. Now a flare, if you've ever seen a flare, is a military flare shoots up and has a parachute on it, and the flare kind of fluctuates in its intensity as it slowly drifts down through the trees.
So what this is supposed to simulate, like the flares going up and like slowly coming down and like the embers, you know, exploding and burning the woods and everything around them is what it's supposed to simulate.
You can also shake the light by actually literally grabbing the light stand and shaking it, which makes the barn doors flap and gives a certain on and off light stutter type scenario. A second lighting effect we did was using HMIs, which is a kind of light that is blue, like the sun. We set those up really high and we pointed those down at a similar angle down along the set to mimic the moon coming through the trees. We set those lights up behind branches of trees so it could give a dappled effect, which makes it more realistic.
So you have to have lights that create mood, mimic moonlight, and you also have to have lights that allow you to light up your scene so that your camera can be properly exposed. Lighting plays a huge, huge, huge part in creating a look for a film.
Right now we're setting up our Edirol R4 Pro digital recorder, so our 24-bit sound will be coming into here. Josh McGill right there is setting up a work light for me, and then he's going to be swinging the boom all night. So, 2-man sound department, nice and small, compact.
When you're young and you're first starting out and you want to make a YouTube video or you're making a video with your buddies, it's fine to just use the onboard camera mic. But as you progress in your filmmaking career, one of the things that you have to take into consideration is it's got to look good and it's got to sound good, because you want to continue to maintain that suspension of disbelief. We decided not to run the audio directly into the camera, so we shot the picture with the camera and we had another recording device on set that was strictly just to record the audio and monitor the audio.
Speed. The first hurdle that you have is you got to have a generator, and it's got to be, you know, somewhat near set.
As long as you kept the boom mic underneath the horizon of the hole, then it usually didn't pick up the generators. So, you know, whenever, you know, I would kind of go above that, I would hear it and Jace would hear it.
We did as much as we could on set to minimize the noise, but we knew that it was going to be there and we were prepared for it. It takes work to get rid of, but it's easy because it's a constant frequency. You know, a constant sound like that is something that's very easy to remove.
Same thing.
It's real important when you're doing production sound and you're on set that you have somebody there that is specifically monitoring whether or not there is a wind burst or a plane. It's very important that you take the time, consideration, and even a little bit of money to make sure that you have good audio, because it's got to look good and it's got to sound good. Otherwise, people aren't going to watch your story.
All the 2 actors fully wardrobed. I want to get J. Todd with the radio, and I want to run some blocking. I'm going to need Andy in the hole with me to come up and figure out what we want to do with the actors.
Another thing that was extremely helpful for us was having a friend of mine, Andy Rice, who had fought in Vietnam behind enemy lines.
Andy Rice played a huge role in making Last Bullet authentic.
We knew that it was imperative that we kept the realism to wardrobe, to the action, to the guns. Anything that we could control, it was really, really important that we tried the best we could to make it as real as possible.
If you're right-handed, you would have it not on whichever shoulder you're going to shoot. So I'm thinking you probably, in your case, yeah. In Matt's case, we put it out of the way of his .45 holster.
He knew exactly what it felt like to be there, to have bullets whizzing over your head, to have bombs going off.
20 feet behind you.
Bam!
Will we turn around and look at it, or?
I don't think you would turn around and look at it. I think you'd keep running. I don't think you'd be like, hell, that didn't hurt me, I'm keep going. Isn't that what you'd do, Andy? Or
Just his understanding of the intensity, and that guys in Vietnam, it wasn't Rambo, it was just regular people put into a situation.
He had all this real life knowledge that he brought to the project.
What are you making there? Camouflage to go on North Vietnamese pith helmet.
A lot of the times, he was right in the middle of everything as it was being shot, making sure the reactions of the actors were authentic to the way the soldiers in Vietnam would have reacted to an explosion, or really just being in a foxhole and being in the situation that they were in.
Without totally humiliating you, go back to the way you were, and let's see you not use your leg nor your left arm.
Looking at the film and the various drafts and revisions, what we had to work with, I think we made a splendid use of those resources and pulled things together with volunteers and others who made contributions of gear, etc. I think it worked out very well.
He had helmets from Vietnam, and actually had J. Todd personalize the helmet, which a lot of the soldiers did back in Vietnam, where they, you know, with a Sharpie or a permanent marker, just kind of personalized their helmet. So J. Todd took the helmet home and did that, and it turned out really cool.
It's deja vu for me to be looking at J. Todd and Matt and seeing their demeanor and their uniforms, and it's very real to me, even though it's been 38 years ago.
Andy, what do you think?
My only question is when you're running and something goes off, unless it's to the side, it's going to hit you in the back.
Okay, so maybe here?
Yeah, I mean, if you need to be able to see it, I guess on the side or something.
So there wouldn't be an exit wound.
But like over here, shrapnel's going to hit your bone and quit.
We knew we were doing a Vietnam picture. We knew we needed to have blood because one of the guys is really badly hurt, and we knew that we needed makeup just to give it a gritty kind of war look. So in the original production plan, we had hired a makeup artist that was going to do all that stuff for us, and as it turned out, her schedule wouldn't work, and sometimes when you're doing these projects, people try and strong-arm you.
It's such a specialty role. It was a little challenging trying to find somebody that could do that for free.
Okay, first thing we're going to do is put coagulated blood all around it.
Luckily, a friend of mine said, hey, you know, I've done makeup, and I kind of figured, well, you could do some blood, you can make, you know, mix up some Cairo syrup and throw some food coloring in it and throw it on, we'll be fine.
This is going to hurt your hairs on your leg.
It's all right.
But what I didn't take into consideration, and luckily he did, was all the other nuances that go into creating that look. Jason would actually take the actors and drag them through the mud.
It's just starting.
He would throw dirt on them.
Throw your head back.
He would spray them down.
It's probably hot in the jungle, and so I'm trying to build up some perspiration on him. But this is also a base because I'm going to make him roll around and pick up a little more dirt. Matt, the main character, goes through several different stages of woundedness. So what I try to do is, as the scenes went on, and a lot of times I would have to wipe him clean and start over, and I used Polaroid pictures and digital pictures to match it up, but I would try to, you know, constantly be making him look more jaundicey or yellow and whiten his lips.
I mean, they looked like they had been through hell and back. And it wasn't just the blood part of the makeup that was important to this project, but it was also the little nuances as the story progressed and they got worse and worse. I mean, when the bombs exploded, they throw off debris. Where's the debris going to go? You can't have a clean face actor. All these little things are important when you're talking about creating and maintaining that suspension of disbelief.
Take the dirt off your hands now. Let's do some coagulated blood underneath those fingernails.
The makeup was fabulous. Jason did a really, really great job.
On a budget like we were trying to shoot this, I think I was amazed at what came together and the realism that was portrayed.
We're about to have some stuff blow up.
I need you in the hole looking at what I need. Lit, I need you to get that camera up, and I need to see
where if the explosion's going to be in frame. Working with special effects of any nature creates its own amount of challenges. I've directed a lot of things over the years, but I've never done anything that had explosions, gunfire, optical effects, compositing effects. And so in doing all the planning, we had to take all that into consideration.
Good to go. Give them hell.
Good. So right now we're getting ready to do this big stunt, and Bob Shelley and Lisa are setting this up. J. Todd and Matt are going to be running the corridor here, and so we're going to tape rehearsal several times, and then we're going to do it, because I only get one.
Anytime you have real guns on set with real bullets going into them, it's a time to step back and really take the time to do these shots.
And then there's going to be one, boom, and you're actually going to disappear behind the flames. You're going to come.
It's definitely okay for it to take longer when it comes to explosions and gunfire because you don't want people to get hurt.
I could tell that they were a little bit nervous, and so one of your jobs as a director is to allow your actors to voice those concerns. And I said to them, I said, if you don't want to do this, let me know now and we'll figure out what maybe we can do differently that makes you comfortable, because everybody needs to be comfortable and safety is always first. All right, let's set it up and let's run rehearsal. Let's get the cameras up, let's get the guys in there, and let's get it ready.
Couldn't ask for a better team to have produced the weapon, the explosives, when it was time to shoot those scenes. I had absolutely total faith and confidence that that was going to go as planned with no accidents.
We decided to put the Steadicam on the side and a tracking shot, which means that they're profiled against the camera as they run, and we decided to have another camera in front as they were running towards them, and there were going to be bombs laid out. Here we go. Well, one of the challenges that comes with working with special effects and explosions is they don't always work. We ran the corridor once, we practiced it for probably 20-30 minutes, and then we did it and one of the bombs didn't go off.
Cameras rolling and all that, and they come running down the hill, and the first one went off, the second one, and then the third one didn't. And so the guys, you know, in their rehearsal, they were supposed to, you know, the third explosion was going to put a piece of shrapnel in one of them's shoulder, and so that created kind of an issue with how they reacted. And so when the third one didn't go off and then the fourth one did, then that created some issues. And then so we started back over and reloaded the holes in the ground with the explosives.
We need to do it one more time, and I got to get it done in the next 5 minutes or we're over.
And then when we shot it again, then a different bomb didn't go off. And so luckily all four of them went off as they were supposed to. It just never was at the same time. And so then that created a task in editing to make it look like it was one continuous run down the hill and that all four of them went off as planned.
Are you guys okay? Well, luckily we were able to do it one more time and we got what we needed. But just because the bombs didn't go off doesn't mean that you get a free Coke. You still pay for it. And so those are the things and those kind of restrictions that you have to think about when doing a film like this, is how to get the most production value on the screen and where to use the money that you do have.
I think when we shot The Last Bullet, having Bob there with his M16s that fired blanks, and Bob and his daughter, I believe, using the explosive charges that could set off and mimic grenades and or mortar fire, that made a substantial, was a huge plus for the shooting itself.
That's great.
We're set. It looked good. I'm jazzed.
When I had started talking to Bob Shelley about the special effects and how much time it was and how much the special effects would cost, we did it on a day rate, and a day rate is 10 hours.
There was some confusion as to how much time we had with Bob Shelley, and so they started packing up to leave, and we didn't have all the shots that were scheduled for the first night.
We thought we were going to have him till 4 in the morning, and about 2 a.m. he announces that he's getting ready to leave because part of the time that we bought for him is taken up in breakdown of what he had to do and loading it all back in the truck in travel time.
Bob says, okay, well, if I stay now, I'm going to go into overtime, and you don't want that if you're on a limited budget.
But Erica Eads, the AD, really jumped in and kind of rescheduled everything and really made it happen on the second night. And it made up for the time that we lost on the first night. So if it wasn't for her, I don't know if we would have shot that in 2 days. So
great. So you guys are on time if we let you go now.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Erica. Okay, let's chat about that. I had worked on a project with a friend of mine, and I had noticed that he had had a great assistant director, and the assistant director is not an assistant to the director, somebody who brings me coffee, but the assistant director's job is to be the foreman on set, to keep everything moving, to keep everything on schedule.
Get Matt in the hole and figure out how you want everybody.
After that project, and as we moved forward with Last Bullet, I said, hey, Erica, I would love for you to be my first AD. And so she and I started working together on, okay, what are the shots that we need to tell the story, and how much time is it going to take to get those shots?
So you have 2 separate takes of him firing out the back of the hole, so I don't think that you necessarily need to get return fire right now.
Okay.
You can, and if you want to get return fire, we might as well get it when the gun is loaded and he's firing the gun a lot.
I agree.
Okay?
As a director, it's your job to make sure that you're getting good performances and that you're getting all your shots. But you need somebody that's watching the clock and keeping you honest so that you're not dragging.
In making movies, ending on time and getting stuff the way that you've scheduled it is really important.
Things will take a lot longer than you anticipate, and sometimes things go super long because of outside forces like rain, or somebody has to leave set, or things get shifted around, or sometimes things just go long because they go long. And some things are quicker than others. But you need to have somebody there, like a first AD, that you can say, do I have enough time to do another shot?
So second he jumps in, reveal the fact that Lawrence is laying there. You ready?
A lot of people think that a director just shows up on set with their coffee and bosses people around. That's not the case. As a director, your job starts months and weeks before production with the script. You've got to think about every little detail that the writer has put down, and you have to figure out how you're going to translate that onto the screen.
Scene 20, Juliet, take 4. Marking.
One of the challenging things that you run into as a director is always there's never enough time, there's never enough money, no matter how much you have.
Action!
So you want to plan to shoot in your most efficient way that's going to give you the highest quality, most creative, most emotionally impactful product. We were in some really tough shooting situations that was both physically tough, mentally tough, and emotionally tough. Throughout the course of the rehearsal process, I developed a very intimate relationship with my actors so that I could take them to a point, and even when they thought they were mentally exhausted or physically exhausted, and push them further.
I'm not your messenger boy. We got it.
Cut. Good.
We did it. We did it, team! We did it!
For me, one of the most moving moments is the actual end, where you get to see that Jason, who had been working months on trying to create this film, actually got it done.
We did it, guys. Thank you. Done.
Post-production is always worked out in the pre-production. How are we going to get this thing actually put together? And since I have my own post-production facilities in my house, a home studio, I had agreed to do all the offline editing. And then ECG production partners had agreed to do the online editing and the sound design and all the titling and optical effects. Offline editing is basically me taking the raw footage and chopping the narrative so that it has some semblance of the script. It doesn't have any sound design, it doesn't have any of the optical effects, it doesn't have anything other than just the raw footage that was shot and captured in front of the camera. Once we go to an online edit, we start to add those elements.
Once I got my hand on the first rough cut, it was a matter of going through and watching the film together, deciding where we wanted to go with it.
Working with an online editor is a really great experience for a director because it allows us to talk about the different ideas. I can sit there with him and say, you know, here's what I was trying to convey when I cut this together, and he can say, well, maybe we can do it this way.
When you're doing something that's 10 minutes long, every frame is important.
One of the things that really kind of blew my mind was that when we did all the explosions on set is how kind of weak they sounded. Visually they're great, but they kind of just go boom. But in going through the sound design and adding the bullet hits and adding the explosion sounds and adding just all the different elements to create this 3D space in a two-dimensional picture is really interesting, and it really plays a huge part in the film's narrative. Both these roles were very physically demanding. When you're talking about putting somebody out in the elements, in the cold, in the mud, and blowing them up and throwing dirt on them and dragging them through the mud and asking them to run down a 100-yard corridor and drop real explosions on them. I mean, we really physically beat these actors up, and they did a great job, and they were troopers about it, and I think they had a good time at the same. Whenever you begin a project like this, you need to begin with the end in mind, because where you end determines how you start. And so you need to figure out, is it going to be on YouTube? Is it going to be for your friends and family? Is it going to be on the festival circuit? Are you going to release it direct to DVD? Because it's all going to determine every single decision that you make leading up to that, from pre-production to production all the way through post.
We knew that we wanted to make a high production movie for as low a budget as we could come up with, and then if we needed to spend a little bit more money, then so be it. That was why we wrote it in one location. We networked so that we could use the back lots, and so that all the money that we spent, or at least the vast majority of it, went on the screen to make a good high production value 10-minute movie.
When we set out to do Last Bullet, up until we rolled the first frame, I thought to myself, how are we going to make this happen? And obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, between insurance, between money, between the weather, between just all these different things, you just have to persevere. You just keep going, you believe in yourself, you believe in your project, and if you just continue to believe in it, and you just continue to get up and you continue to work hard, eventually somebody's going to believe in you.